It started out like any other Saturday morning. The sun had barely risen, and the birds outside the Johnson family home in Oregon were just beginning to sing David Johnson. A 42-year-old father of two grabbed his coffee and headed out to the garage. A DIY enthusiast, David had spent many weekends working on his projects, refinishing furniture, fixing old engines, or building birdhouses for his daughter Emma. But this day, what he found inside that garage would change his family's life forever. David's garage had always been a bit of a catch-all. There were tools hung carefully on the walls, old boxes stacked in corners and in the back, a tarp-covered object he hadn't touched in years, his late father's old workbench. It had been too painful to look through it since his dad passed away in 2017. But on that morning, with nothing else on the schedule and the memory of his father feeling strong, David decided it was time to finally go through it. He moved slowly, peeling back the tarp with a gentle hand. Dust flew into the air and settled like ash. The smell of aged wood, grease, and memories filled his nose. He stood still for a moment, hands on his hips, staring at the cluttered workbench. There were drawers he had never opened, containers with screws, nails, and faded labels written in his father's distinct handwriting. David opened the top drawer and found a few worn-out screwdrivers and pliers. Then the second drawer full of old notes, diagrams, and even a photo of him and his dad working together. When he was just a boy, he smiled. The nostalgia was overwhelming but comforting, until he pulled open the bottom drawer. The drawer was unusually heavy, creaked and resisted, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. When it finally gave way, David saw something that made his stomach turn. There, underneath a mess of tangled cords and rusted tools, was a small wooden box. Nothing fancy, just old pine with a tiny brass latch. What unsettled David wasn't the box itself, but the initials burned into it. They weren't his father's. They weren't his. The letters R.J. stared back at him, etched with care into the lid. David's last name was Johnson. Yes, but he had no idea who R.J. could be. He hesitated. Should he open it? Maybe it was something his dad picked up from a flea market or a friend. Still, curiosity got the better of him. Inside the box, wrapped in a delicate piece of cloth, was what looked like a stack of letters. David unfolded one and instantly froze. The handwriting was neat, but shaky, and the words, they weren't just letters, they were confessions. The first one started simply, "To whoever finds this, I never meant for any of this to happen. What we did back then was wrong. Should have never been buried literally. We made a mistake, a bad one. And now, I live with it every single day. Please forgive us, if you can." David's pulse quickened. Who was we? What had they done? The rest of the letter went into vague detail about a night in the woods, a promise to keep quiet, and something that had been sealed beneath the floor. It sounded like something out of a mystery novel, but the paper felt real, the emotions raw, the words trembling. He opened the next letter, then the next. Over a dozen confessions, each more cryptic than the last. But a pattern began to form: names, locations, dates, all pointing to an incident that happened in the late 80s, not far from where David had grown up. There was mention of an abandoned property, a group of teenagers, and an accident that someone had tried very hard to cover up. Suddenly, the air in the garage felt thick. David's heart pounded in his chest. These weren't just old letters. This was a secret, a buried past, maybe even a crime. He didn't want to believe it. His father had been a good man, a quiet, hard-working family man who served in the local fire department for over 20 years. The idea that he could be involved in something dark from his youth was unthinkable. But then David noticed something even more disturbing. Inside the box, taped to the bottom, was a photograph. It was black and white, clearly old, and showed 5 young men standing in front of what looked like a rural cabin. One of them, unmistakably, was his father. But the others? David didn't recognize them, except one. The man on the far right, his face was circled in red ink. On the back of the photo, one word was written: witness. David's breath caught in his throat. What did that mean? Was this person a witness to something the group had done? Or was he someone they feared would talk? He decided not to touch anything else. Not yet. He took photos of the letters with his phone and carefully closed the box, placing it back in the drawer. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but he knew it was serious and dangerous. Later that night, after his kids had gone to bed, David sat down with his wife Laura and told her everything. Together, they read the letters and discussed what to do. Should they go to the police? Should they track down the names mentioned in the letters? Laura, ever the voice of reason, insisted on one thing, first verifying whether any of this was real. They started researching. Library archives, old newspapers, property records. What they found chilled them to the bone. In the summer of 1988, a teenage boy named Rick Jameson had gone missing in a wooded area near Crescent Lake. No body had ever been found. No suspects named. But an abandoned cabin near the lake had been mentioned as the last place he was seen. One of the names from the letters, a boy named RJ, Rick Jameson. His father had written letters confessing to something surrounding a missing boy, and possibly a cover-up that had lasted over 30 years. And now, those secrets had surfaced in his son's garage. It took days for David to work up the courage, but eventually he contacted the local authorities. He handed over the letters, the box, and everything they'd found. The detective who received it was stunned. "You might have just broken a cold case," he said quietly. Within a week, forensic teams were dispatched to the cabin site mentioned in the letters. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies beneath the old wooden floor. Human remains were eventually recovered, bones that would later be identified through DNA as belonging to Rick Jameson. The story hit local headlines. The Crescent Lake cold case reopened after 35 years. The Johnson family name was never tied to the public narrative at David's request, and due to his full cooperation, the sheriff's department agreed to protect their identity. But the truth was out, and David was never the same. He spent weeks wrestling with the reality that his father had possibly been part of something tragic and concealed it. But more than that, he struggled with the pain of legacy, what it means to inherit not just memories, but consequences. Still, David found some peace in the fact that he did the right thing. That a family who had spent decades searching for answers finally got some closure. That a terrible secret no longer lived in silence. To this day, David keeps a photo of Rick Jameson on a shelf in his home, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that truth matters, that silence can be broken, and that sometimes the most terrifying discoveries are the ones that lead to healing. Because in a dusty garage, beneath a pile of forgotten tools, one father found not just a box of letters but a key to the past, the courage to unlock it.